All right, so Gloria Ladsen-Billings came up with 9 principles connected to culturally responsive teaching, right? And we're going to go through each of these, not too far in depth into each of these, but we're going to go through each of these. I'm not going to waste the time reading those to you, because we're going to highlight each one of them individually, all right? All right, so principle 1 is the idea of communicating high expectations, right? Now, how many of you do that with your students? Yeah, we all try to do that, right? We make an effort to communicate to our students in some way that we have high expectations for them. Whether it be orally or through our syllabi, right? We make some attempt to let them know that we have high expectations of them, right? So think about how faculty here might convey high expectations to students. What are some of the ways that they might convey high expectations to students?
Confidence that you can do the work.
You can do the work.
I know you can do the work.
Okay.
Not being so rigid, there are certain guidelines, but not being so rigid that you can't allow them time to learn a concept and expand.
Say that again. Say that louder.
Oh, okay.
I heard it, but it's important. I want to make sure everybody hears it.
I can remember. Not being so rigid that you don't give a student time to absorb the information and expand, at a particular pace where they are.
Yeah, that's so powerful. Right? And so many of our students are so used to being in a school system that is so confining, right, and restrictive. And we know that many of our students come with deficits already, right? So that confining and constrictive process didn't necessarily work, right? So why are we continuing to use it in the college classroom when we have a lot more freedom with how we can work with students, right? Any other ideas?
I think what's important is raising the bar, but telling them exactly what tools they need and provide them with those tools to be successful. So like, yes, this is a high standard, but you have everything that you need to reach that, you know? And letting them know too that they're not alone in making that trek, but holding them to that, you know, not being, I mean, when I introduce my syllabus, it's very much like, this is how it's going to go, and kind of being rigid in those ways that need, and like, you know, we'll say there are certain things that like you can be more lenient on, but showing them that you actually mean what you say. And then I also try to hold myself accountable to what I say. Like if I say, I'm going to turn back your paper this day, I make sure that, because if they see that I don't do things that I say that then how are they supposed to be doing that?
I love that. I love that. I was just talking with a student 2 days ago, actually, right? And her English faculty member, she's a non-native English speaker, and she's in our ALT program, American English Language Program. And her faculty member, her professor told her, you cannot use contractions in your work, right? You have to spell out the work. And then on her PowerPoint, she had contractions, right? So the student said, well, you're telling me I can't do it, but you're doing it, right? The professor got offended. It became sort of confrontational dialogue, unnecessarily, right? It's those types of things we have to be mindful of, right? What we tell our students, we have to follow, right? It sounds simple, but we don't think about it when we're planning or when we're actually working on things, right?
And I joke with my students because there are certain assignments that like for example, I have this thing about cumulative tests. Like I don't do cumulative tests, and people have different views about it. But I was like, when I was in college, like I felt like I'd already proven myself to show that I understood part 1 of the semester. So I'm not going to put you guys through it because I would want to do it myself currently right now. And so we have this like, I won't give you anything that I won't put myself through.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Lisa Delphin, I mean, one second. Lisa Delphin, right? She's another prolific scholar. She wrote Other People's Children, right? And she wrote a series of essays that talk about working with students from different backgrounds. And in her book, she talks about the need for teaching students the culture of power, right? And being very explicit with students about the culture of power. We live in a society where it is an expectation that you know how to do this because, right? And being explicit with students, that's so, so important. I'm sorry.
It seems like there's, I mean, I know there's some instructors who, like for the first exam or maybe the first couple, they let the students revise their answers or like redo the test essentially, and they expect them to achieve a certain minimum understanding. But I think that's a really positive message. It's like telling them, look, I know you can understand this. Here's your second opportunity to do it. And you got to get it done. I've heard stories like this pretty much every student who does something like that and comes back with an understanding of the material, it makes the test seem less punitive that way, you know, for learning experiences rather than just tests.
Very true. And I apologize, I called you Paul, Steve. I apologize. Okay. So when we communicate high expectations, I just want to make sure I drive this home, that we all remember. We need to let each student know what we expect from them, and that is to engage, perform, and to do so at high levels, rather than making excuses in our own minds about why it is that they're not performing, right? Because we can tell ourselves some really rich stories about our students and run with those throughout a semester without really having an opportunity to talk with the students about what's really going on, right? So it's important for us to make sure that we let students know what it is we expect from them up front. And we do a lot more harm to students when we lower our expectations because we don't think they can reach what it is that we've set the bar at. Okay? Yes?
In some cases, though, I think some instructors take it to the extreme, what they might believe that I am communicating high expectations for you. And yes, I might say that I am going to provide scaffolding for you throughout the course. But at the end of the course, only 70% of you will make it. And I'm setting
I've heard that before. I've heard that before, right? So I had a professor, one of my dissertation participants told me that one of his professors told the class at the very beginning, so only 3 of you are going to pass the first test. Right? That's how he started off the course. Right? So what does that say to the students in the course? Right? They're already disengaged. Right? So how do we address that though? How do we have conversations with faculty around these issues, particularly when there are peers? Right? If we know that a faculty member is doing that, how do we engage in those conversations? Right? That's a very difficult conversation to have with peers. Right? But if we're really about student learning and we're really about student success, then we are willing to take the risk to engage in a conversation, particularly if we have a good relationship with the faculty member. Right? Hopefully the department chairs are also doing some of that work and having those conversations at the department level so that it's expectation for the department and not just a peer-to-peer conversation. Principle number 2 is this idea of active teaching. What is active teaching? So I'm up here and I'm learning, right? Is that active teaching?
I'd have to say it's participating with your student. You know, like we talk about listening, being active listening, same principle.
That's right. Getting involved in the teaching and the learning, right? And also, I hate when I see faculty members who are in front of a classroom and they're not in the process of learning from their students. Our students give us information every day about how to teach them, right? And if we're not looking at those messages, right, we're losing out on ourselves on becoming stronger professionals, right? Better professionals. They're not the only students who are those strategies are going to work with, right? It helps us to build our repertoire of skills. So how might this look in our classrooms here? How might this look for you all? Yes?
Always have to know your audience. And there are some things that I can do with a group of students one semester that are absolutely not going to work for the semester. And you're right, by interacting either very quietly or they're rambunctious, you know, they'll let me know what they're willing to do. And I try to tell them at the beginning that all they need to get an A in my class is to reach this number. And if you don't reach it the first time, you can do it over and over again. If you're willing to put in the work, I will be great. But with every class, they're always, you know, not 100%. Make the effort to get it done.
Right.
I think for me what active teaching looks like, Delphine, is not lecturing the entire time. I mean, there are times that I need to be out there and teaching them skills, but there has to be an application portion. And something that one of my students shared with me once was like, I can tell a teacher cares is when they're walking around and you know, and I'll sit in with small groups and I'll ask them questions and I'll share my story in relevance to what they're talking about, but actually being part of that learning process.
That's very, very, very important, right? So we build in opportunities, and you said, I think you said it, right? Opportunities for the small lecture, and I like to call them mini lessons, right? So we do the mini lesson, and then we give them time to do it, to apply it, right? And then we might have to do some more mini lessons, right? Targeted on some of those areas. And we're doing some of the summative and formative assessments throughout so we can figure out where those needs are. But we're not standing in front of the classroom the whole time, just lecturing. right? How many of you would that work with today? Exactly, right? And we know that our kids today are so different than we were when we were in school, right? It's even worse, right? In the video that I was going to show you, it was funny, I was showing it in the office yesterday in the video, there's a text message thing that keeps going off, right? And we're trained when we hear those noises to want to look at our phone, right? We're so easily distracted, but we have to figure out how we take those snippets of information and build them in to lessons in ways that students are going to be able to consume them. And not all of our learners are like that, right? Which is why we need to diversify the ways that we teach. All right, so coach your students to question, consult original materials, connect content to their own lives, and that is so critically important, right? So I like to do interest inventories with my students to find out what types of things they're interested in, right? And I do that in a number of different ways. I can do that through an actual survey, or I can do it through a writing assignment in a very early part of the semester, right? And ask them to share with me things that they're interested in. And then I look for ways to build that into the lessons throughout the semester, right? So that they are able to make connections with it. They're more willing to engage in that way. And you can tap into, one of the things we'll talk about is students' expert knowledge. They're experts at things that we don't know, right? That they can learn from. One of the things, I did my master's thesis on the use of popular culture to increase reading, fluency, and speaking, right? And what I found was with my students who were on gaming systems all the time, I could use gaming magazines and instruction manuals to teach them things like instructions, how-tos, right? I could teach them protagonists and antagonists through materials that they were most comfortable with, because that's what resonates with them. And when they see that in the classroom, they see themselves reflected in the curriculum, you have so much more rich learning going on, right? And they're more willing to take those academic risks. They're more willing to develop that safety, right? When we talk about safety, it's not that physical safety, it's that safety from psychological harm, from emotional harm in the classroom, that they've already been subjected to so often, right? We talked about how curriculum is subtractive, right? Angela Valenzuela wrote a book called Subtractive School, right? And it's all about how students are erased from curriculum. And what that experience is like, sitting in a classroom, not seeing yourself reflected in history courses, years and years of history where your people are never even talked about. Right? So what message does that send to you? Teacher as facilitator. So this is, I think, an important part, right? And this is something people struggle with all the time, because oftentimes it's hard to see yourself when you're a faculty member or a professor as a facilitator, right? Because you have a very structured role around what a faculty member or a teacher or an educator is, and a facilitator is somebody that runs a workshop. A facilitator is somebody that runs a meeting, right? But if we look at the teacher or the educator as the facilitator, right, we are facilitating knowledge construction. We are facilitating knowledge comprehension, right? We are imparting knowledge so that our students can get what we need them to get. So how might we do that? How might we step away from that need to lecture and facilitate learning more?
That's always been my question. It really has.
Yeah, it's an important question, right? And I would argue that the way you do that is by tapping into your students, right? And finding out from them what it is that they need. And that requires that you have conversations with them. It requires that you go a little further than what's going on in the classroom, right? So you take your students out to lunch. Or you set up a time to meet with some students after class. Or you stand in front of your door when students are coming in and say, hey, how was your day going? As they're walking in, and you learn about your students, right? And then you know what types of things are going on in their lives, and you know what types of things to bring into the classroom, right? And you work with your students to help them be contributors of assignments in the classroom, right? So one of the things I love to do with my students is I love to give them parameters. I need to give you guys an assignment, but I want you to tell me what the assignment is, right? So tell me what it is that you would like to do, and make a case for why it is that that's going to allow me to assess that you know this, right? And I make that an assignment for them. So they go home and they think about it, they come back with all these sort of ideas that I never would have thought about, right? I would have never thought about some of these ideas, right? And then my next question to them is, okay, now how will I grade you? Create a rubric. Tell me what success looks like, right? And I allow them to be a constructor of the knowledge that's going on in the classroom and how the assessment actually happens in the classroom, right? I know what I need them to learn, and I give them parameters around that, right? I need to make sure you know how to understand what main idea is. Tell me how you're going to understand that. Tell me how you're going to demonstrate to me that you know that. Right? And I get some rich ideas from them about what that looks like. And then I'm able to use that in other classes. Right? It builds my repertoire in many ways. Okay, so this is the idea of building students' capacity to handle new material. Right? giving them the opportunity to solve complex problems, making sure that you're allowing the locus of control in your classroom to shift so that students feel like they're also in control of what's going on in the space. And I promise you that when you do that, you're going to see more students engaged. You're going to see more students willing to ask you questions, right? And help-seeking behaviors is one of the things that we know with certain populations of students, Latino males in particular. Help-seeking behaviors are things that they do not engage in, right? Because it's a sign of weakness, right? Machismo says that we don't ask for help. So how can we create spaces in the classroom where you don't have to ask for help, but it surrounds you, right? By sharing the control in the classroom and allowing them to be the ones that answer some of the questions that come up in group work. And just making sure that you're there to not only scaffold, but monitor, right? Because students don't always have the right answer, right? So you've got to monitor too and make sure that the content that's being imparted is actually accurate, right? Okay. All right, so this is positive perspectives on parents and families of culturally and linguistically diverse students. And this is something, I get pushback about this a lot, right? Because this is something that happens in the K-12 system, right? This is one of those things, well, you know, we encourage our teachers to know who the parents are of the students who are in our room. Why do we need to do that in college? Right? The reality is there's a lot of rich opportunity to learn from parents as well, right? And one of the things one of my colleagues does that I think is a terrific assignment is he has the students write about their backgrounds and include information on their families. And then he invites parents and community members into the classroom to give talks to the students. Right? Now some students squirm and don't feel so comfortable. Other students are really excited that their parents are coming in and sharing all the information. You know, but it's a great opportunity to offer learning and to also show students what life might be like outside of college beyond the experiences in the institution. Right? So taking time to get to know families does matter in college. Taking time to get to know the communities that our students live in. Right? It's really, really important. Doesn't mean we have to live there. Right? Doesn't mean we have to spend all of our days there or our evenings there. Right? But understanding where they come from will help you understand what they're dealing with in your classrooms. All right, so understand cultures represented in your classroom by getting to know your students. Visit the neighborhoods where they live. This is kind of what I've already talked about. All right? And we'll make this PowerPoint available to you after this talk so that you can have this information as well. So this is a good one, right? So have English language learners, invite them to lunch. Right? And when you're having lunch with them, you'll see how they handle conversation. Right? It's an informal opportunity to do an assessment, and you're not assessing them for a grade, but you understand where some of the challenges might be, and you know what types of things you need to do in the classroom, right? And that doesn't have to be only for English professors, right? This works with STEM, this works with all areas, right? If you know that your students are having trouble communicating in a certain way, you can help them through your content. All right, cultural sensitivity. So what does that mean? What is cultural sensitivity? I see some thinking going on. Yes?
Well, it's perceiving differences between the students and between the students and you, and how you might react to something and how you reacted to things when you were going through school and learning, and trying to get into their mental universe.
Anybody else? Yes.
It is also about teaching or taking the time to teach students or communicate the classroom dialectics.
Say more about that.
Well, yeah, at Santa Monica College we have roughly 13% of our students who are international students. So we're very proud of that fact. But we don't always take the necessary time to teach them about differences between their educational system in their home countries and how it differs from a typical American classroom. We communicate our expectations individually, but sometimes you have to compare and contrast and invite students to share what it's like perhaps in their own countries, and see, to help them understand just a little bit better. So how does a classroom actually work? It's not just communicate your expectations, however high they might be, or however supportive you might want to be, but you also have to be aware that those differences will play significantly in the context of the cons.
That's absolutely true. Absolutely true. The thing that I want to make sure I drive home, though, connected to that, right, is that is so critically important, but it's important in how you convey the message, right? It's really important in how you convey the message, because oftentimes, meaning well, we levy micro-assaults or microaggressions toward our students without realizing that we're doing that. Does anybody know what a microaggression is? Come tomorrow and you'll learn. No. We're going to spend a lot of time tomorrow looking at microaggressions, and we're going to spend some time reading an article on microaggressions in the community college classroom and how that happens. But for example, a microaggression could be a faculty member in an English language program saying, in America, we don't talk that way. Right? Or in American Standard English, that's not how we use those words. Right? It is very sort of offensive to a non-traditional student, to a non-native English-speaking student, to hear that my language doesn't matter in this space. Right? We have to find ways to bridge, right? Because our job is to be the bridge builder for those types of students, right? So we have to find ways to bridge their understanding about how their language matters and academic language matters. And academic language is so different than basic English language, right? Than basic English language. Right? So we have to think about that in our messages. But you're absolutely right, that is an important part of the work. Absolutely. Next slide, Nancy.
You know, the thought process was because the question was about what's meant by cultural sensitivity, but cultural awareness, they're really two different things.
They're different things.
Yeah.
They're different things.
And when you talk about sensitivity, I sort of immediately go to the awareness side of it. So could you expand more on the sensitivity?
Yeah, sure. So being aware is one arm, right? That's one piece of it, right?
Yeah.
But what do you do with that awareness? How do you use that awareness? Right? That's where the sensitivity comes in. Right? How are you using that awareness to inform what you're doing in the classroom so that you can be sure that you're sensitive to the group of students who are sitting before you trying to learn? Right? So you can be aware. So for example, I have some friends who teach who are aware that their students come from urban environments. Does that mean that they change their teaching? No. So they're not really being culturally sensitive. Right? So if you're not adjusting what you're doing to help the group in front of you understand in ways that are most suitable for their learning, that's not being sensitive. Now, the challenge is that the diversity of learners in our room means that we have to figure out how we do that for a multitude of students.
At the same
right?
time.
At the same time. And that's why it's important for us to think about diversifying our instruction in the same lesson. Right? So having multiple approaches to teaching one concept. We often don't do that, right? We think about, this is what I want my students to know, this is how I'm going to do it, and we get it out there. But we have to be thinking about how we might need to build in smaller mini lessons in different ways that provide the same bits of information for our different types of learners. And if that's important for different learning styles, it's important for different cultures, it's important for gender. I mean, there's a host of reasons why that becomes important, right? But oftentimes it's not what we're thinking about in our planning process, which is why part of the work that we need to do around culturally responsive teaching is being reflective about the ways in which we've come across the ways we've developed our own lenses around what teaching and learning is. Right? And that reflective work is really an important first step in the process. Good question, though. Very good question. So anchor your curriculum in students' everyday lives. Right? And this is really what I was talking about before. Get to know who your students are so that you can figure out how to bring things in. Now there is certain content area you can't change. Right? But the ways in which you teach it can be changed. And that's what matters. Right? So when I taught math, and I'm not a math teacher, but when I taught math, I would think about how my students were using math. What was relevant to them? How do I make these concepts relevant to them? When I was in graduate school and I was working on stats, struggled through stats. But the reason it worked for me is because a faculty member recommended a book called Stats Without Tears. Right? And that book really did help, but the faculty member understood that that's what I needed in order for me to get it. Right? And that, after I read the book, I was able to do what I needed to do to, be successful. But it was because the faculty member gauged what was going on in the space. That wouldn't work for every student who was in my class.
And how appropriate that was, because there are other books as well for dummies.
Right, exactly. So Stats for Dummies.
Communicating very different messages.
Exactly.
Right.
And I went and got the Stats for Dummies book, and she said, no, you don't need that. This is what you really should be reading. Yeah, very good. All right, so reshaping the curriculum, and this is we've been talking about this a lot already, right? Thinking about how our curriculum is designed so that it is exclusionary or subtractive and building ways to make it more inclusive. Right? We can't talk about culturally responsive teaching or culturally responsive pedagogy without thinking about the fact that we need to reshape the curriculum because our curriculum is steeped in the dominant heteropatriarchal culture. Right? There's no way to get away with that. There's no way to get away from that. It just is what it is. So we have to figure out how to reshape curriculum so that it is more inclusive of the diversity of students in our classes, so that it does reflect the lived experiences of the students who are in our classes, so that it does tap into the community cultural wealth that exists in the spaces where our students live. Right? That is so important in the process. How do we do that? That requires ongoing work. Right? It doesn't happen overnight. You're not going to get it right the first time. So this is based on research around the things that are important in reshaping curriculum. Right? Is it integrated and interdisciplinary? Is it meaningful, student-centered, and connected to the student's real life? Does it develop higher order knowledge and skills? And it should utilize a variety of learning strategies, such as cooperative learning, whole language, and diverse learning styles. So culturally mediated instruction is one of those things that requires a little bit more conversation, right? Because when we talk about culturally mediated instruction, we're really talking about putting ourselves in situations where we're not the dominant person, right? Where our culture or our identity is not the one that is preferred, so that we can try and experience what somebody who is not in the dominant culture experiences, and then do some reflective work. What did I do to make myself more comfortable? What did others do to make me feel more comfortable? Right? How did I survive in the situation? How uncomfortable was I? Did I have to leave? Right? Being reflective about all those things is important, because the answers to those questions will help you understand what students are struggling with and make you more sensitive to what their needs are as you're teaching them. Okay? We've talked a lot about this one already. Student-controlled classroom, right? Providing students with opportunities to be the leader in the room. And then this is the idea of small group instruction, right? And this is what I was talking about before about academic language, right? Our academic language is much more complex than basic English. So how do we provide students with opportunities to develop that academic language? The way we can do that is through small group instruction, right? So they're comfortable talking in their groups in ways that are comfortable for them, but they're still getting content, right? And then you're helping to mediate it by rotating through the groups and having ongoing dialogue with them, right? You'll find students are going to participate more, and it bridges the gap in the oral language that happens where students who have to share out in public in the classroom are reticent to participate. All right, so here goes some final thoughts. Differences make a difference in teaching. All right, they don't have to be a block. They will be if you ignore them. They don't have to be though. But it's important to acknowledge that differences make a difference in teaching. Right, and I put that up there as a safe way to say that it's not okay to be colorblind. All right, it is not acceptable in a culturally responsive environment to say that I don't see anybody's culture. Right, that is the most attractive thing you can do to the students who sit in your spaces. A lot of this work is as much about our will as it is about our ability. Right, and so if we're willing to engage in the work and engage in the process, we will. Right? And then we just have to find the opportunities to continue to practice it. Right? And one of the things I like to do with folks, and this is something you all might consider, is building partnerships with other faculty members who are engaged in trying to do the same thing. Right? And inviting them into your space when you're teaching a lesson and saying, can you help me? I'm trying to work on this skill. Can you help me by giving me some feedback? And then offering the same thing to that faculty member. Right? If it's a safe space and you guys have a good relationship, it shouldn't be a problem. I wouldn't do it with a chair if somebody's going to evaluate me. but you might want to do it with, a colleague. Remember that non-majority students routinely experience school exclusion and subtraction from the curriculum. Okay, so they routinely see themselves excised from what we're doing. And that in and of itself is silencing and results in students withdrawing. This is a big one. I love this one. We have to remind ourselves about what it means to be culturally responsive, right? And remember that we should design our teaching in such a way that more of our students across more of their differences are achieving at a higher level and engaging at a deeper level more of the time, and without giving up who they are in the process. It's a mouthful. But that's really what culturally responsive teaching is. Right? Culturally responsive teaching is about getting our students to engage across their differences, and to do so in a way that allows them to engage in complex activities and gain content without having to surrender who they are. All right, if you need to contact me, if you can't make it tomorrow and you need to contact me, there's my contact information. All right, if you want to talk more about some of these things via email, I'm happy to do that. If you want some additional resources, I have tons of resources connected to this. I'm happy to share them. All right, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to entertain them now. I know that we're kind of out of time.
Okay. Thank you so much for coming. I really
Thank you all for
appreciate
coming. Thank you for your participation.
it. Thank you.